Our guest tonight, Dillon, has been a writer for, well, we'll talk about that, but he's writing for the LCC Torch, and though I had contact with him before he became a Torch writer, certainly he got some lessons which we may talk about as part of the thing. So welcome, Dillon. So where are you from? Originally, I ask everybody that standard question.
I was born somewhere in South Central Los Angeles. I can't really remember. I know the hospital I was born at was Torrance, California.
Okay.
Ended up moving up here when I was 3 years old, and I have been here ever since.
Okay. What was the decision to come up here?
My dad told me that my family was looking for a place to stay, like, before they even had me, because, you know, it wasn't really a good neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And then they came up to Eugene, and the front page story on the newspaper apparently was about a kid that got his bike stolen, so they just thought it was a perfect place to live. Because it doesn't seem like, you know, a lot of crime was going on here.
Yeah, until look, I remember when I moved around here, probably a little before that time that you're talking about that, because I moved here something like 25 years ago. So I probably even remember the kid whose bike got stolen. But in any case, at the time, the DEA had basically named Eugene as the #3 producer of methamphetamine behind Philadelphia, and that was in the early 80s. So even though, there was... It's definitely quieter than L.A. or even Torrance, which, when I remember growing up, Torrance was segregated, one of those segregated cities. So to have a black kid in Torrance in a hospital is something. So you came up here and lived here ever since, so you did school here then?
Yep, kindergarten through college right now.
So what are some of your scholastic aspirations? Here you are at Lane. Mm-hmm. And what do you want to do? What are your goals? What do you want to do with your degree?
Ever since I was a kid, I've wanted to write books, and I've been writing books. Like, I'd let my friends read them when I was really young. They'd love them. I used to make comic books, just make stories. It's what I really like to do. I came to Lane Community College in hopes of being a journalist, though, because I didn't have a lot of confidence in myself yet as a writer. I've been working on journalism, improving on it, getting better at it, and I think I can see myself working for maybe a magazine or a newspaper in the future.
Okay. So when you would write fiction and comic books for your friends, what about, you were working on a book, you said?
Oh yeah, the book right now. It's about two guys that fall in love in high school. I haven't exactly came up with a name for it yet. The plot's not finished and everything, but been working on it. It's coming along pretty good. The main character is based off of me, and a lot of the people in the book are based off of people that I know. Thought it'd be easier to do it that way, and so I'd know the characters better. It'd be easier to map out their actions and what they'd say and do more. And some of the situations in the story are actually things that have happened to me in real life. Not all of them, but just a few I thought were kind of important to put in there.
Yeah, that is part of the blend. The story has to be believable, and even sometimes, people get into trouble even if they tell the truth and it sounds, unbelievable.
That happened to me.
I mean, I had that discussion, for example, with the guy who, I think what's his name, Robert Fry, that wrote that book that, 1,000 pieces or something like that, about his drug experiences, and, basically had fabricated a lot of it, but, some of it was real, and he blended in between the two. And so those of us who work the field, that particular field, the addictions field, were kind of going, okay, well, I know people like that. This almost rings true, but then there are other things that sound out there. And so why make stuff up? Why not just stick to the real story unless that's too boring? But your experience is not the typical American experience, even though you're an American.
Definitely not.
So growing up here, you've traveled to Los Angeles. You've traveled to places outside of Eugene, so you know the kind of the difference between, for example, one of the things that becomes apparent, and that's one of the things, in talking with Chinosole today, like I've never lived in a place that did not have an intact black community, ever. So, until living in Eugene. And so the atmosphere that you grow up with the acceptance of diversity, where it's like, okay, we don't have to talk about multiculturalism because that's what we're living. But here, and then switching between a place like Los Angeles and here, where, all right, first of all, you were illegal. You and I were illegal in Oregon to begin with. Part of the history, that's part of the history. And not having a geographical black community to grow up with, where do you find your roots and your identity? So where do you find your roots and your identity?
Honestly, it took me a long time to do that. Growing up, I always knew I was different from people, and I just couldn't really fit in and be like anyone else around me. I didn't have any gay black friends, and I didn't come out to people until I was in like high school. So it wasn't until then that I could finally accept myself as a gay black man that I could finally start to discover who I was, love myself for it, and then connect to other people that are like me.
When did you know you were different? I guess at an age.
I think I kind of always knew it a little bit, but the time that I really started to realize it was in middle school, and people started, wearing all their different brands of clothing and stuff, and then they said, I had to wear this kind of stuff. I shouldn't wear Abercrombie and Fitch. I should wear baggier jeans. I should, just basically dress like a gangster.
Like a gangster because you're black.
Yeah.
Right. And who was telling you this?
White kids.
White kids. Right. So that was their expectation, right? What about, okay, so baggy pants and don't wear A and F because what? That's for the white kids?
I guess so.
Yeah. That's one of the things that's part of, I guess, youth and popular culture, like how do you fit in and where do you fit in, and even fashion statements, like, who would have thought that Abercrombie and Fitch, would be, kind of like a whites only thing, or, that's the implication. You shouldn't be wearing A&F, you should be wearing something else. Mm-hmm. So how did you accept that? How did you fight back against that?
I still don't know to this day how I dealt with those people. It was hard. I guess just having good friends, people that care about me, focusing on those people, keeping those relationships strong, and doing things that made me happy. As long as I did that, then, I survived. I did all right.
Yeah. So so that's race. So then when you add sexual orientation to the mix, then what happens?
That actually happened in a high school. It was my senior year. We got an assignment after reading this book called Mrs. Dalloway. We were supposed to make some sort of contemporary art piece. And so,
this is one of the local schools?
Yeah, this is at North Eugene High School.
Okay.
North Eugene High School is International High School.
Okay.
And so I ended up do you remember that Andy Warhol image of Marilyn Monroe with the different colored pictures?
Right.
I did that, but I took pictures of gay rights leaders. And, Matthew Shepard, Ellen DeGeneres, other people, I can't remember who I put on there right now. And I made like a kind of blanket out of it. So I showed it to the class, and I said, these are people that stand up for people and like civil rights and stuff. And, they need to, because a lot of stuff's going on right now. And these are the people I support because they're fighting for me, because I am gay. No one looked at me. No one said anything. Everyone was just looking down at their desk, playing with their pencil, doing something. I don't know. It was weird. I'm like, all right, I'll let that sink in for a bit.
This is in the middle of class.
Yeah, this was during my presentation.
Okay.
And I'm like, all right, I'll just let you guys kind of figure it out. Then went on with my presentation. And after class, 2 girls came back to me and said that they really respected what I did. They wouldn't have the guts to do something like that, and they thought it was really cool.
How did you feel?
I felt good. I just felt like I didn't have to hide anymore, keep all these secrets and make up all these lies, because after a while it's just like, can't remember all the lies, and they start to cross over each other, and it just doesn't make sense anymore. It's so hard to keep up with all those lies and just cover the truth. It's a lot easier to just be who you are, accept yourself for it, and deal with it.
Yeah.
You know.
And so, if your book is basically about kind of like that experience, like fictionalized, I mean, so yeah, the lies are fiction, right? Right. So the things that you tell people so that you get over, give an example of some of those things.
Things that I don't understand.
Well, you said, okay, like telling lies so I can be myself. So what are the lies that you told to get over? You obviously can't hide you're black.
Yeah. I'd say I had a crush on girls. I'd date girls. And yeah, I think that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never had any relationships or anything to hide because, you know, I didn't experience any of that until after high school, really. So,
Yeah.
yeah, just pretty much acting like I was interested in women when I really wasn't.
Race. So you dated white girls? Was that a problem?
Actually, first girl I dated was a white girl. That was in middle school. And we were just kind of friends. She knew I was gay, so.
What were her parents like with that?
We didn't get to see each other that often. We went to different schools, so it was kind of our own thing. We were young, and she was like the first person I've been in a relationship with. But high school, I had another kind of girlfriend figure. She was Asian. She was really cool. Still talk to her every now and then. And yeah, now that I look back at it, they weren't like real boyfriend-girlfriend relationships. It was just a friend. Sometimes we'd kiss, and I'd tell people that was my girlfriend.
Okay. Because, you know, I could envision, and maybe this is material for a story, but, you know, the whole, let's see, in my generation, it was this movie came out when I was in elementary school, so it was Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, right? So Sidney Poitier as a black professional, you know, going to the parents' house, and the parents were Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy, and so they had issues with it. And I know just from studying the history of this town that that was an issue in terms of like integrating the schools. You know, what about dating and modeled babies, and you know, like this, you know, black and white spots like a cow kind of babies, and so parents have, you know, don't bring a nigger home, et cetera, et cetera. You know, people would talk about that, and then sometimes in high school they would rebel and, you know, just bring somebody that looked like you home anyway, and then you have eventually, you know, if you extend that scenario out, you know, the former Ku Klux Klan member having to babysit little baby Jamal or whoever. So, you know, the reason I asked then is how, so, you know, if you hung out or have contact with black kids, because it could be frequent occurrence that you could be like the only black kid in your class. And
that happened a lot. It's really hard being the only black kid in class when you're studying about stuff like slavery.
Right.
When I was younger in elementary school, whenever we studied slavery or like segregation and stuff, everybody in the class would stare at me.
Yes.
Constantly. And it would just like feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and it sucked.
Yeah. I mean, because it's one thing to be standing up, you know, in front of the class doing a presentation, you know, with all these gay figureheads on, you know, the blanket, so to speak, right? And then everybody's like suddenly studying the writing on their desk, you know, when you're talking about being gay and all that kind of stuff. And then it's another thing where, you know, they're not paying attention to you, so they're ignoring you. And then the general subject of slavery comes up, and you feel all the stares, the weight of the stares. Oh, well, that happened to him. That's his people. That's,
It still felt weird.
yeah. So how'd you deal with it? Did you write? Was writing part of your therapy, your escape? Your way of dealing with it?
Writing and reading were definitely a good escape for me when I was a kid. That and, playing with my action figures, making up stories with those. Playing with friends, just using my imagination was a great way to escape reality and not have to deal with that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So what kind of escapes did you devise?
What do you mean, like what kind of writing?
Yeah.
Or?
Like what kind of stories?
When I was younger, first I started making comic books and stuff because I didn't know how to write that well. It was just stories about animal people, comedies. Later it turned into stories about young people my age, like in middle school, middle schoolers just going through stuff and dealing with life. I really like to write fantasy though, and I still do. It's my favorite genre.
Fantasy in terms of like other worlds, magic, all that kind of stuff? What do you mean? World
Just
of Warcraft?
anything.
Yeah, what kind of fantasies do you mean?
Not World of Warcraft, like witches, wizards, dragons, vampires, whatever, just anything you can think of. Something that you don't see every day that's not supposedly real. Just fantasy.
What kind? Would you put any special twists on it?
Yeah, it'd make the characters more real and believable. Just average, everyday people are like, interesting teenagers and stuff.
Yeah.
And add those human emotions and just make it seem like it's not fantasy, like it's actually real. It's really going on and this person has to deal with it.
The reason I ask is there's a tradition within, when like some of my favorite science fiction writers, right, are lesbian and gay, right? I mean, so I'm het, but Samuel Delany, to talk about one of the more famous black gay science fiction writers who wrote about, a lot of different genres besides the science fiction, but the people that he would write about would be like in marriages with aliens, and they'd be people of color, right? Okay. Octavia Butler, who would write about telepathic black women. So all her characters in her book were basically like her, strong black women, kind of outcasts, kind of different. Readers, writers, people who could also read minds. Her vampire story, for example, it was the last one just before she died, called Fledgling, was a vampire story where the principal character was a young vampire who appears to be like 10 years old, but she's actually 50 years old.
Okay.
Right? And that she's black. And so she can walk around in daylight. And her tribe was basically a group of black vampires that lived in the Northwest. And they were basically having this war with white vampires because of racism. So as an example, in terms of people writing and finding their writer's voice, they often project these fantasy worlds in which, okay, what if I were doing this? So, what if I'm, not only a wizard, but I'm a black-skinned wizard dealing with, these contemporary issues.
So you mean they put their own personal experiences inside the story?
Right, or do a twist. And one of the things that I've noticed with writers like that, especially if it's like a genre like, black people writing science fiction, or black people into science fiction, that's not necessarily the stereotype, where, it's like the white kids in your school saying, oh, well, you should be wearing baggy pants instead of Abercrombie and Fitch. Well,
yeah.
Right. Who would expect a black science fiction writer? Who was that? Right. When Chinasol's writing about, all right, here's my experience. I'm writing about women's experience, and I'm not a lesbian, but and I am writing about prison, and I am writing about this, that, and the other. We have to take a stand where we're either in a struggle or we're melding into society and trying to be invisible, except we're not, because we're usually the only person. And so writing about that isolation too. Let's talk about as a writer, you write from what you observe, right? And so, from me being a writer and observing this town and you growing up here, let's talk about the article that kind of generated some controversy.
All right, let's do it.
So you're on the bus, and you ride the bus here, and David Bradley, for example, another black writer who has been around in this town and was in residency at the University of Oregon, talked about how America is a classed society. And he said, and his analogy was, okay, if you want to see how classed society it is, look at public transportation and look at the bathrooms. Okay, so high class, is airlines, so airports and airlines, and next lower class is trains, and next lower classes is buses like Greyhound, and then, city buses, et cetera, right? In terms of looking at the classes in society and the divisions. So you observe folks, and I'm old enough to remember this, in this phenomenon in cities, which we refer to an open air asylum. Okay, where we're dealing with people who are, let's see, I'll just say they require a little bit more understanding than others, right? So you observed some folks on a bus, and you wrote about them. You wrote about your experiences. Well, let's talk about that.
Okay.
What did you describe?
I describe people that just did the most crazy, bizarre things, and I stand by my statement because, normally you don't see people pulling out drumsticks on a bus, getting their flakes all over somebody.
Eating on a bus, right, because you're not supposed to eat on the bus.
Yeah.
Right, and there's signage that say that.
And grown woman with a doll that, pets her hair, says nice things to it, gets off the bus and just throws it on the floor, starts cursing at it and stomping on it. I mean, come on, these aren't things you see every day, So I stand by my statement. It was crazy. Probably wasn't nice of me to call these people crazy. I understand that. I think what rose a lot of tension, though, is when I said that the one woman with the doll went bipolar on the doll. I did not mean bipolar disorder. Right.
Well, because you're not, Well, when we talked about that, writer to writer, there is, quote unquote, what fits in a box, normal behavior, right? And, basically, if codes of conduct are put on the bus, right? Okay, don't eat on the bus. Nobody wants to clean up your mess, et cetera, et cetera. That's one thing. I used to think it was a sign of mental illness that people were talking to each other until cell phones came out. And then the little ear things, hands-free, and they're like, people are talking to each other, and, if you don't see the cell phone, they look like what we used to call crazy. Because, you're talking out loud to yourself, and, and now it's almost become a socially accepted norm. Oh, well, okay, you're not crazy, you're just being socially rude on the cell phone, which that's better. No, or at least we have an explanation for it.
That's just a thing, though. Those are people's opinions, and they should have the right to write their own opinion and, publish it. I protected the identities of those people. I did not mention who their names were. Honestly, I don't know who their names are. More honestly, I don't even care what their names are. I've never seen these people again. It's just I don't understand where the line is anymore. I can't describe what I've seen, even if it's the complete truth, and express my views on it. That's all I did. And, it upset people, it offended people. The whole time I was writing it, I did not think about disabled people. I didn't think any of these people were disabled. I didn't know if they were. All I thought about was what they did. It was crazy, it was really funny, and I thought people would enjoy it, reading it. And that was it. There was no malice behind my intentions at all. I'm not that kind of person. I'm gay and black. I'm the last person to judge somebody else for something they can't change.
For an immutable characteristic, right?
Yeah.
And so what What is it like for you when you hear people use the term "that's so gay" as if it's stupid?
And gay means different things. It means homosexual. It means, you know, happy.
Well, now, 50 years ago, it meant happy.
Yeah. It's just English language. I remember Richard Rodriguez, he was talking about it in an interview. He doesn't even describe himself as gay because he's not a happy person all the time. I think he said he's more morose or something like that.
Okay.
I can't remember, but just with our language, one word describes so many different things and people can take it the wrong way. And that's exactly what happened with me. I really didn't mean to hurt anybody's feelings. And, you know,
And you were observing behavior.
yeah.
And, you know, and I can attest, having seen each one of those people myself. All right? So when I read the piece, you know, I admit, I smirked. I thought it was funny. Right? But then I saw, because I do have degrees in psychology, and I do deal with, you know, people whose behavior, you know, the piece that I wrote, you know, basically that will show up in the torch at some point was, okay, you know, knowing you and knowing, okay, I'm young, I'm gay, I'm a writer, I'm in Eugene, I've experienced all kinds of discrimination, I've been the butt of jokes and discrimination, you know, that's not where I was coming from. I'm simply observing this behavior and, you know, commenting on it, right? And so, right, so people then jumped on you for, you know, being, you know.
Yeah, the way that it happened too, you know, I understand that people, when something offends them, they get worked up and they do things, but just the way that they went about it, it just seemed like it was a personal attack on me. Like, you know, my publication got a hate mail. I've never gotten hate mail before. It was my first time, and I'm like, wow, what do I do with this?
Hey, it's part of your initiation as a writer, okay?
It was my first time dealing with that.
You
and
struck
it's
a
like,
nerve, and you didn't know that the nerve was there to strike, and that's often what happens.
If it really offended people that badly, then they should be able to express why and like educate people why it's not okay to say stuff like that without, you know, swearing, using malice, slander, libel, stuff like that. Like, educate people and teach them. There's a ton of people out there that don't understand what it means to be gay, and they always ask me questions. Whenever I go out to a party, people are always like, oh, you know, when did you know? How did you find out? Did you tell people? Are you sure? What's that like?
All the standard stuff that I just asked you. So you got your iPhone there, right, with a dictionary?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So look up gay. Now, the reason I'm doing this on television is because when we were discussing this in terms of the writer's art and vocabulary, now, I mean, I had this conversation, you know, with Chinisola, and she, you know, we both had this laugh because, you know, we're within 12 years of each other. So we were raised on my parents. You know, I can't speak for her upbringing, but my parents particularly performed a particular type of child abuse. That is, they would use big words and then make you look them up in the dictionary.
Yeah,
And
I
then,
understood that too.
okay, and then, you know, since Dad was a doctor, or is a doctor, you know, he'd use medical terminology and make you look that up in the medical dictionary.
That sucks.
Oh, well, but, you know, it's teaching you, right, in terms of that. So you've got gay on there?
Yep.
Read it.
All right. Means happily excited, merry.
Mary, okay, happily excited, okay.
Keenly alive and exuberant.
Keenly alive and exuberant.
Bright, lively.
Bright, lively.
Brilliant in color.
Brilliant in color.
Homosexual.
Oh, okay. All right.
And given to social pleasures, also licentious.
Licentious.
I don't know what that word means.
Okay. So here's an interesting piece of business. I bet 50 years ago, you would have found all but the last 2 or 3 references in that definition.
Oh, probably.
And homosexual would not be in there. Okay? But now, with the addition of homosexual, licentious means you like to have sex.
Oh.
It's loose morals, etc., etc. So there's a subtle little coding there, right? So the other day, so when we were talking the other day, and I'm just going to reveal that part of the conversation, right? So your piece generated controversy. You know, you struck a nerve. You got hate mail. You got comments. You got, disability services says you're discriminatory or impugned your et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? The editor writes a retraction, right? Describing, not you, but you took it on personally, as I would do, in that glib and callous.
Let's leave my editor out of this.
Okay. Well, no. Well, I'm just saying this.
Okay.
He did the standard thing because editors have done that to me. That's what they do. Just like when I wrote my piece, you came in and we edited. We went over. Okay, leave out put a period here and do this, that, and the other. You edited my piece. I mean, that's your job as a copy editor. You're supposed to do that, right? And so I had you. Okay, glib and callous. Glib means you say something without speaking. You speak your mind, right? Without necessarily looking at the, larger implications. Callous simply means, oh, well, you're not having feeling, right? So you didn't consider the weight of your words. Well, right, if you'd never had that experience, or your experiences of discrimination went along different lines, it wouldn't occur to you, right? And so I was like, look up the word callow. Now, this is one of the things that we did in terms of looking at, writers working with words, and young black writers working with words, and what levels of discernment and discrimination are we called on? Are we held to the same standard or not?
Lacking adult sophistication. Immature.
Callow, okay, immature. Right, and that's it, right?
Yep.
Okay, now one of the things that Chinisole pointed out, and I pointed out to you earlier, right, is that we're, as black writers, we're held to a higher standard.
Not just as black writers, as black people.
Yeah.
We got to do, really well in everything we do.
Right. Now, I don't know if any of the hate mail basically took a racial tone.
I didn't read all of it. It's just like online bullying. If someone's going to give you a message just to hurt your feelings, don't open it, don't read it.
Yeah.
I skimmed through 2 sentences, and I'm like, all right, forget this.
Yeah, yeah. Now, one of those expectations, just like it goes with the baggy jeans thing, except that this is more positive, right? You're supposed to know about discrimination. You're supposed to have a heightened sense of the unfairness and, rally against it. I mean, that's part of the stereotype, at least with some folks.
I don't think it's a stereotype much as an assumption. They just assume that you've been through that, so you might know more.
And you may or may not have, right? So when I described callow, which the dictionary definition you get from, and remember the gesture that I made. Okay, the dictionary got to be at least this thick.
Yep.
And maybe if you want to go Oxford, then it's like this thick.
Yeah.
And so callow, basically, where it came from is, imagine an eagle chick, right? Baby eagle in the nest. So its wing feathers are very close to, the wings aren't big enough to flap, and the feathers aren't long enough to actually catch air. So all the eagle knows is its nest, what's right in front of it, right? And it's only till the feathers grow in and it begins to flap its wings and catch air that it can take off and get a bigger, broader perspective. And then the reason I used eagle is because from 1,500 feet up, an eagle can read the fine print on a newspaper, if an eagle could read. Right? So from the top of Skinner's Butte to the valley, about 1,700 feet roughly, I think. So eagle could read a newspaper. Now you couldn't even see the newspaper. An eagle could read it, which means then seeing far. in that adult capacity, right? And so, one of the things that we're kind of called on, and I think what's really exciting about your book project, is because as a counselor in high school, I knew how hard it was for people to come out. In fact, every adult that I talked to that was gay said, "Oh, don't have them come out in high school. It was horrible." How was it for you coming out like that?
Honestly, the high school I went to, I don't like to say bad things about people, but really those kids weren't that nice to me anyways.
Yeah.
So I just didn't feel like it could get any worse, and I felt like lying to them gave them some sort of power over me. So I came out to my class and I let them do the coming out for me by telling the rest of the school, because I knew they'd gossip about it. And I didn't have to deal with it.
What kind of blowback or repercussions did you get?
I didn't get any, really.
No? Okay.
I'm sure people said tons of stuff behind my back, but, they wouldn't say anything to my face.
Because sometimes that happens, and it's frequent. So nobody beat you up, nobody attacked you, no?
Nope.
No? Cool.
Yeah. I know it doesn't happen everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things you wrote about too, as part of the article as well, which nobody. So it's interesting that people picked up on the chicken thing and the woman beating up a doll, but there was no comments about the guy masturbating in the seat behind you, or the would-be drag queen trying to pick up on you, or whatever.
I know, and it's just like, I wasn't making fun of these people. I was just saying, what they did was crazy. I call them crazy. I admit that was wrong, and I'm sorry for doing that. If you have a mental disability.
But it did happen.
Yeah.
It did happen. Okay? And it does happen. So it kind of looks like, okay, so how are you supposed to respond to that and not take that on? Some of those experiences could be devastating for people. They could be triggering for people. Particularly the sex stuff.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that a writer's gift is to talk about what happens in the everyday from their own experience. But also, as we were talking about, to kind of write it so that you kind of tell a little bit of the backstory, if you know about it, the history, because that after the initial shock, that kind of draws them in, and they're able to hear it a little bit better.
It's kind of hard to write the history when you have a word limit of 750 words, though. Like, there was one more incident that I put inside that column, but I had to take it out.
What happened?
And it was really embarrassing, so I want to talk about it.
All right. Okay.
But, yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. So, you write this book. Who's your audience, you think?
Gay people, maybe parents that are trying to understand their children better if they think or know that they're gay. Young people in general, or just people that support or identify the gay community.
What do you think? So this puts you, by writing about this puts you in the role of being a role model.
Really?
I just wanted to let you know that, you write a book like that about coming out in high school that semi-mirrors your experiences, then in one sense, you become an expert. Or they presume that you're an expert. What would you say to, you're in college now. What would you say to the gay people in the QSA, about coming out in high school?
In the QSA in high school?
Yeah.
I'd definitely say if you know someone's gay and they're not out to people, don't force them to do it. They need to come out on their own time. It's a natural process. Some people don't even do it, but don't force them to do it because it's still not safe.
Don't out them, in other words.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are the things, it's not safe to be gay? So, I did hear you say that, right? Okay. So, how do you make it safe for yourself?
You accept it.
Okay. How do you defend yourself if you're attacked? And I don't just mean physically, because most of the time it's not just physically.
Gosh, it's a hard question to answer.
Hey, I know. And you can think about it or defer, or think about how you would write if you wrote about that or have gotten to that. But that's essentially what I'm doing is showing you, okay, this is in that deck of cards that you just opened. So that's why I went there.
Okay. Someone attacks you verbally, I guess the best thing to do would just be to either shrug it off and talk to them about it and say, hey, that doesn't make me feel too good, this is why, or just laugh at it. Mainly show them that it does not affect you. Once they see that it doesn't affect you, they either stop or it gets worse. But either way, just don't let that stuff get to you, because it's not true, unless you believe it's true. If you believe it's true, then it is true. But if someone tries to tear you apart, just don't let it happen. Don't let it get to you.
Okay, that's a start. That's a start.
I can't think of anything else besides that.
Well, yeah, okay. So I mean, and that's your real-time advice in terms of being in that shall we say neighborhood, of high school, which because you talked about Matthew Shepard and Ellen and et cetera, et cetera. Okay, Matthew got killed.
Yeah.
Ellen's on American Idol. Richard Rodriguez, who may or may not be out or whatever, but you're out, and so you haven't experienced attacks, except maybe verbally, maybe not. But there comes a point at which you might have to defend yourself at some point, because you know that people get attacked for that particular characteristic, and sometimes they double up on you.
Yeah. I don't know. There's many ways people can attack you, and there's many ways you can defend yourself. Yeah. So it's hard for me to come up with a general.
Well, the self-acceptance piece. Well, the self-acceptance piece is huge.
Yeah.
It is huge.
If you love and respect yourself, then what people say to you to hurt you will not matter as much.
Right. And if you find things or people to be proud of. So I mean that piece in terms of looking at. Who are your, you're a role model. So who are your role models?
Honestly, I don't really have any role models. I feel like having a role model, you're kind of walking down that person's path of life, and I don't want to do that. I want to make my own. There are people I respect, though. Ruby Bridges, for one. And gosh, it's bad I can't even remember this kid's name, but I think it's like Larry. Okay, forget it. Ruby Bridges.
Okay, all right. And you can call the kid Larry, but what do you admire about that kid?
He was a kid. I think it was a school in California. He was in middle school, and either middle school or late elementary school. He had a crush on another guy that went to his school, and it was Valentine's Day, so he gave him a Valentine. He went to his class, and then the kid he gave a Valentine to came in with a gun and shot him point blank in the head around all of his classmates. I felt horrible. I felt really bad, but this kid, he wasn't afraid to be himself. And he didn't let that kind of stuff get to him. He didn't hide himself from people. He wore his cool little boots or whatever, his flashy clothes and everything. And it was just so cool that somebody that young would be brave enough to just be who they are.
Yeah, and he paid a price for that too.
Which is really unfortunate.
Yeah. But to be willing to be yourself enough to risk that.
And Ruby Bridges, I've respected her a lot since I was a kid, because when she was a girl, she transferred to an all-white school because, she was really smart and everything. And when she'd go to school, and she'd walk down the pathway to get to school, and there were all these protesters on both sides of the pathway. There's this woman that had a little black doll in a coffin, and she'd wave it in front of her face, and then another woman that just said the most horrible things to her every day, cussed, swore, and like threatened her and everything. And the fact that she could continue to go to school every day to get her education despite what those people are trying to do to her is just amazing. She didn't dull her shine for anybody else. So that's a quality in people I really admire.
Right.
Yeah. So those are the two people I respect, but I don't really have any.
Well, I mean, those are great examples. I mean, risking, well, one actually paid the ultimate price for being himself, and one merely risked the threat of death, even though depending on where and when she could have, done that. I mean, because that almost reminds me of like what the Little Rock Nine went through. But this is more recent, so that kind of stuff still goes on, even though it's on a more subtle level. So to be yourself despite the resistance of society and members of society, I mean, and that's one of the things that you're doing.
It's not just me, it's a lot of people, and they do it in so many ways. There's a lot of different things that society doesn't really accept yet, just like people's cultures in general. Some people are still trying to fight for that, and I don't remember the name of it, but women wear that mask over their head when they're from the Middle East, and that's just who
The
they
burqa,
are. Yeah, and people don't accept it, they get freaked out over it, but that's their culture. So there's people out there just trying to fight to be themselves, and it sucks you have to fight to be yourself, and people just can't accept you for it.
But sometimes it's like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of like the observation I had made in terms of looking at, well, at one point, people that looked like you and I couldn't even ride the bus, or had to ride at the back of the bus, and people who were mentally ill or not considered normal, if they were white, they were put in a hospital. But if it were black people, we weren't allowed. Well, one, we weren't being diagnosed as mentally ill, so if we were mentally ill or developmentally disabled, we had to stay at home because they weren't putting us in the hospital unless there was like no family. So then we go from that to, all of a sudden, folks are released out into the community or living in group homes or whatever, riding the bus with you and I on the bus, right? So that also kind of means that if we're the people that have to have the understanding, because we've been, and that's the stereotype, we're supposed to have more understanding and be acting as if we have more understanding, then we have to tell other folks stories that can't tell them. Because at one point we didn't have our stories. I mean, that's kind of what excites me about your project. It's like, all right, I wish somebody had put out what it was like to come out in high school. Basically, when I was talking with kids, because there were others that paved the way for you, and now you're also paving the way for others.
And there's another man, he's an author, his name's Alex Sanchez, and he wrote the Rainbow Boys series, and it's about...
Rainbow Boys series?
Yeah,
okay.
And it's about, guys that came out in high school and everything that they had to go through. And yeah, those are books I read when I was a kid, and I still really like them.
He's Latino?
I think so.
Latino surname, anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if your characters are you, or one of them is at least?
One of them.
Okay, so black? Locked?
Yeah.
Okay. In a city like Eugene, or in Eugene? Where is it set?
It's Eugene. Right now, it's in Eugene at the high school I used to go to, but I'm going to change that later. Definitely going to change that later. But, I just try to make it as local and easy for me to write and remember as possible. So right now, everything's pretty local, so it's easier for me to write about it.
Yeah. So how many chapters have you got?
They're not in chapters, really. It's in sections. It goes between two of the guys are both juniors in high school. One's name is Hayden. He's the character I base myself off of, and the other's Justin. And it goes back and forth in between both of their perspectives.
Okay. All right. Do they go to, well, that would be telling. Do they go to the prom, but whatever.
It's not even at that point yet. Right now, they both hate each other, so...
So the initial relationship forming stages, huh?
Yeah. I don't want to give away if these guys
No,
are
of
actually
course
gonna,
not.
you know,
Of course not.
get together or anything, but I can say at least right now they despise each other, supposedly, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess at this point in the process, you're also doing research by not only living it, but seeking out some of the issues to think about, too. Because, you know, whatever, you know, this blow up that happened recently about that piece, I mean, you've moved on since then, and, you know, it's a learning piece in terms of crafting your words. You know, what can you do within that word limit?
Yeah.
How much can you put in within that word limit?
Definitely. I know not to call people crazy now, for sure.
Unless you have the signs and symptoms for what bipolar or lunatic is, right?
Yeah.
Lunatic is, oh, they're driven crazy by the moon, the full moon.
Yeah,
So,
I know about
yeah,
that.
so, yeah, and you know about callow, etc. So I want to thank you for coming,
Thank you for inviting me.
and we look forward to great things coming from you and your impending role modelhood.
Cool.
If you like what you've seen, email us at liveclass@lanecc.edu. Put DiversiTV in the subject line. Tell a friend about the show, this show or other shows, or shows you would like to have in the closing days of this season between now and mid-June. And we will see you anon, as they say in Shakespeare land. Go well, stay well. Until then.